Hi viewers, and today we're going to be carrying on with the project that we did last time. So last Sunday when this was released, the macro that we was designing goes through and takes each of these faces at the bottom of these pockets and selects them and allows you to attach a action to that selection or run an action after that selection. And the reason why we did that is because if we're coming in here and clicking and hitting control for all of these and accidentally click off, then we've lost our selection. And the reason why we're selecting these is because doing actions such as paths require those selections to do such things as clearing out pockets for a CNC machine like so. So we can see our paths being added there for the clear out. But I need to actually select all those paths, and the macro that we've got here, if we run it, jump back, you can see that all those pockets have now been selected and we can actually add our action to that. But we want to make this a bit more generic, so I want to add a GUI to this to allow us to actually select those paths at certain depths and also at different axes as well. So just making it a bit more usable for everyday use, and then we can actually attach that at some point to our toolbar, whether it's in the path or somewhere else. Depends where we want to use it and what we want to use it for. So that's what I'm going to be looking at today. If you like this video, please hit a like and also subscribe to the channel. I also have a Ko-Fi site where you can actually donate to my contributions to the community, and that's at ko-fi.com/mang0. Start with, we've got the macro in front of us, so we're going to alter this macro slightly to actually allow for the GUI interface. So the first thing I'm going to do is just move this down, and I'm going to rem out the macro by using 3 single quotes there and using new line and 3 single quotes at the bottom. So what that's done is just remmed out that macro, so if we run this, nothing would happen. So I'm going to start actually wrapping this in a class that's going to inherit the Q widget. So now we've remmed out all of this current code, we can actually start creating our class. Now I need to have a few windows open down the bottom, so I'm going to go to View, Panels and the Report View so I can actually see what's going on. So our Report View is nice and clear, so I'm actually going to start building the class that I need to do this with. And to do that, I need to actually start importing some libraries. So because I'm doing a GUI, I'm going to import from PySide. And I'm going to use the QT Gui. And I want to import everything from there because I'm going to be using windows and widgets and spin edits and buttons, etc. So I might as well import everything in there. I can import individual things as I so desire. And now I'm going to create a class, and I'm going to call this class Face Selector. Doesn't matter what you call the class, it's just a name. And I actually want that class to extend Q widget. That means that it pulls in all the methods, or it's got the option to pull in the methods of Q widget, and that will allow us to actually create a window or a widget, show, stays on top, etc. methods in our class just by calling them. We also need to define a constructor, and this is called __init, and that constructor will run each time this actually loads up or the actual face selector is instantiated. Pass self in there, and also we need to actually instantiate the methods and properties of the super class, which is Q widget. So super, and then that's got a constructor on there, so I need to pass in my face selector class. I need to pass in self, and I need to run the actual init method on there as well. While I'm here, I'm going to define a property that allows the actual window to actually stay on top, which is set window flags. And in there I'm going to pass qt.window stays on top hint, and that means that when I swap between macro and scene tabs down the bottom here, it will always stay on top. Makes life a lot easier. And then we use self.show to actually show the actual form that we're going to be using, or window that we're going to be using. And also we need to actually instantiate this, so I'm going to use the variable selector, whatever you want, equals face selector, open and close bracket. So we imported a library, we've extended the QWidget class, running a default constructor on there called init. We've got our super in there that we're running, passing in the face selector, passing in self, and running the actual constructor on there. Then we called because we inherited QWidget, we call self.setWindowFlags because that method is available to us, and we've got qt.window stays on top hint there to actually make sure the window stays on top. Then we're just going to show the window, and there it is without any errors, which is good. It's always handy when we actually run this first time it actually works. So now we can actually start fleshing out our class to actually include the rest of our code. Now we're going to run the code on a button, and I'm looking down actually at the original code, and I'm just going to copy and paste that actually. So I'm going to take out the round marks, copy it or cut it from below, and I'm going to define a method in here, and I'm going to call the actual method do work. Not so work, do work, there we are, and pass in self. And this is going to be actually run on the actual button click. So I'm going to paste in that code now. It's a bit all over the place, and what I'm going to do is highlight it, all the code, and use my tabs to actually tab it into the correct place. So that do work now. When run, it will actually run this. But want to run it from a button anyway. So let's place a button in here. So I'm going to create a button. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to just put the button in here. And this, what I'm just doing is putting in some round marks to actually show me what parts of the program we're actually working on. So I'm working on the buttons now, so I'm going to use self.button do work equals Q push button in here. And in brackets, I'm going to actually add the label to the button, or what the buttons can actually display on there. This is going to be called do work. So we've assigned the button to the class now. Also with the button, I actually want it to run this method down the bottom, and to do that we're going to use self.button do work. Now there's methods on the button, clicked, rollover, etc. So all those are on the button. So we want the clicked method, or the clicked event that's going to be run. So this event that's raised, we need to connect that click event to the actual method itself. So self.do work. So that will actually run this method. We don't use the open and close brackets in there because we're actually assigning method. If we use open and close brackets in there, we would actually run the method, and that's not what we want to do. So each time that instantiate, it will actually run the method, rather than when we click on the button, it will actually run the method from the button click. So we just pass it in the method name, self.do work. So we've got the button all set up, ready to go. We also need a layout to add the button to. So in here, Let's put a red mark in here and call this layout. And to define a layout, I'm just going to use the variable layout equals. Now this is where we get into different types of layout, and I'm just going to use a box layout for the time being to actually place the items on screen, and then we'll go back and probably change that layout so we can then get an idea how that layout changes depending on what we want to show on screen. But we're going to be using multiple objects in different places, and also labels telling us what those objects are. So for the time being, this is just going to be a vertical box layout that we can use. So QV box layout. Next, we need to add the button to our layout. So layout.add widget, and in there we open a bracket and we use self dot and reference the button do work. That adds the actual button to the layout, and next we've got to add the layout to the window. So in here I'm using self.set layout, and in here we just pass in layout. So that should mean that now that our window has been created, we can actually assign up a button, connect the button to our method do work. We can also create a layout, a vertical box layout, add the button to the layout, set the layout of the actual window to that layout, and all should be good. And there we go, we've got do work. Now if we hit this button, what should happen is nothing's selected on here. You can actually see this, how the actual stay on top's working as well. So hit do work, and they've all been selected. You can see down here that it's all working nicely. So this is what we want to get to, but we need to actually add some parameters in here. So I want to actually say, well, if one of my pockets is only say 2 mil deep or even 10 mil deep, I don't want to select those, or I do want to select those depending on what I want to select, or I just want to select that one, the one that is at 2 millimeters deep, miss all the ones at 5. I want to be able to actually have the flexibility to actually do that, and this is where we start getting into adding more features onto our GUI and actually supplying parameters and making sure our code can cope with those parameters. So let's jump back to the code, and so let's have a look at the code at the moment and see what we got. Well, we've got a hard coded value. So hard coded means that the value is actually set in the code as a literal there. So that one's 5, so we want to make that variable so it can change. We probably also want to make sure that this position is actually taking a vector variable. So it's taking the z-axis, remembering the actual position was set to the surface dot position, which is a vector of x, y, z, and we're looking along the z for anything that equals 5, so 5 millimeters deep. Maybe we want to allow for that to change as well, in case we want to actually go along the, say, the y or the x-axis if we actually create the sketch on a different axis. So we may want to make that variable as well. But first of all, I'm going to make this 5 variable. So I'm going to put in here depth. As a matter of fact, I'm going to use the words self.depth. And that's going to be also set up here. So when we come in, on the initialize, I'm going to come in after the actual window setup. I'm going to have my variables in here, vars, and we're going to use self.depth equals 5.0. So now we've got self.depth there. We can actually see that we're using it there as well. That means that we can actually alter this if we so desire much easily by just referencing the variable name and changing its value. This will still work. If I hit play, jump over, unselect everything, hit do work, and what you'll see is all of them have been selected, so that's still working. And obviously if we change that, then that won't work, because everything's at 5 mil at the moment and we haven't got anything at any other depths. We can also have the option of changing the way this works as well. If we parameterized it or made it a variable, in that instead of making the position equals the depth, we could actually put a range in here like greater than 5 and less than 10, so anything between that depth actually gets selected. So that makes it a lot more flexible by using variables. So for the time being, we just allow for one variable in there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add a spin edit to allow for us to actually input a depth. Let's add our spin box and also a label to here. So the first thing I want to do is add a label, and I'm going to start up the top here. Hash label in here. Just know that where I'm actually setting this up, and in here I'm going to create a label, so self dot, and the label is going to be do with the actual spin edit or spin box. I'm going to use LBL for label. You can call it what you want, but I like to prefix, and I'm just going to put the words depth in there equals Q label. And with the Q label, if we open the bracket and in quotes add what we want to call it, I'm just going to put the words depth. That'll create a label with the actual word depth on there. Let's put a colon in there to make it look nice. There we go. And also with the layout, now we've got more coming in, so the first thing we want to do is add that to the layout. The order that you add this to is important, so wherever gets added first gets to be on top. Self.lbl depth. You can see that when we run it, you can see depth is sitting there on top. The next thing we need to do is add the actual box itself. So I'm going to come in here, and this is going to be a spin box, so self dot spin box, and we're going to call it depth as well, so we're keeping it consistent, equals Q spin box. Open and close the bracket on that one. And also we need to add that to our layout as well. So we've got a label there. Next thing we're going to add is the spin box. Add widget self dot sb depth. So we've got our depth there and our do work nicely working, and when we move this we can actually see it going up and down. So that's good. So what we're going to do now is assign that to the actual self.depth. Now there's one or two ways we can do it. We can actually, on the value change, we can actually change this self.depth. So when we change any value with the spin edit, our class gets updated, or we could actually take that value the minute we hit the do work and actually go from there. Now the reason why we would do it one way to the other is because if we wanted this to actually update each time we span the box, so each time the value changed on it, we can do that in there, but it takes time for our screen to update, so I'd rather actually take the value on the do work the minute we hit the button, rather than having this ran every single time we actually change the actual value itself. So in here, I'm going to go self.depth, and we're going to equal that to the actual spin edit value. So self.sbdepth value, and we can actually surround that with the float command to actually convert it to a float. Let's give that a go and come back to here. So we set it to 1, do work, nothing's happened. So let's set this to 5 and do work, and all of them have been selected. One last thing I'm going to do is come in here, and though we've got self.depth, I'm just going to set the value of this spinbox to actually the self.depth value. So in here we've got self.depth, so I'm going to change this to depth object, so we know we're in there. So self.sbdepth dot set value and self.depth in there. Now self.depth is a float value at the moment, so when we run this, that will be a float. Now if we want to use floats, there is a different type of spin edit, and when I say floats, anything with a decimal place in there. You can see our float here, so 17.553. So we've got a it's all to do with precision. We've got quite a precise number there, and there is something called a spin, as well as a spin box edit. There's a spin double edit as well, which we can use, and double should be enough for what we want for this job. And when I say about precision, I mean about how precise this number can get. So a double allows more precision, so this allows 32 bits of precision on a float, and double allows 64, but we're talking about points of a millimeter, so at that point we don't need to be this precise in what we're doing. So I'm going to come in here, and where this spin box is, I'm going to use a double spin box. So in here I'm just going to change to a Q double spin box and see what happens. There we go. So still going up by 5, 4, 3, but we can actually type in here whatever we want. We can change the actual length of this if we so desire. Let's actually change the step of this, because at the moment we're going in just whole numbers, so we're going up by ones, and what I want to do is actually go up in 0.5. And to do that I just need to come into my SP depth. Let's close this, and in here I'm going to use self.sbdepth.set single step, and I'm going to change that to 0.5. And there you go. So it's changing and going up and down in 0.5 of a step. But now we've actually changed the format of our search. Before we was actually rounding. If we look down here in our code, you'll find that somewhere. Where is it? So we're rounding the position of Z. So rounding up to a whole number, but we actually want to round that up to a number of decimal spaces. So we can easily do that and I'm going to round this to 2 decimal spaces by just placing the comma 2 there. So that means everything will be rounded to that. And what I'm going to do is actually take that and show the actual depth of here. So just show you how that works. So we've got output console position there, and I'm just going to place that in there. And also I'm just going to format that as a string. Close this and give that a go. Let's clear this panel, and we can change this to whatever we want, do the do work, and you can see that we're now looking at this rounded position. So that's important. So if we're changing the format, we're looking for something that's more decimal places, then we must make sure that any rounding we do actually is reflected as well. So let's change the layout. So at the moment our layout is very simplistic. It's a vertical layout and everything's stacked on top of each other. So we want this more form based. So depth and this depth spin edit by the side of it, and then do work at the bottom. That's quite easy to achieve. So let's close this down. So we're looking at our layout, and what we're going to use is a Q rather than a VBox layout. I'm going to use a form layout. And then with this layout, rather than add widget, we got a command called add row, and anything in the bracket is the actual elements or the objects that we actually add into that row, so the widgets we add into that row. So if we add in 2 things on one row, then we just separate them with a comma. If we're adding 3 things, then also we separate with another comma and add the object. So that is our basics of adding a row. Now with the button itself, we can just do add row there and add the button on a separate row. When we run this now, we should get a more pleasing layout. So that's actually how to create a macro that will select all the individual faces at a certain depth to make it much easier for you actually to do actions on those faces. Hope you enjoyed that, and please hit me up with comments, likes, subscribes, and I'll see you again soon. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video, and please look out for some more. And I'd just like to thank my current donators who have donated via my Ko-Fi site. I hope to see you again, and bye for now. Stay safe.